And welcome on in to the live post-game edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. We are back after a big-time win. Colts beat the Raiders 23-20, go to 9-7 on the season. And George, we're talking on Tuesday's podcast about 2 home games left. It felt eerily similar to 2021, where you have your destiny in your hands for the most part here, with the Raiders at home, second to last week of the season, being on the schedule just like it was in 2021. And George, the best thing we could say after this game is that 2021 did not repeat itself here in 2023.
The score did, but it's flipped this time in favor of the Colts. So I think that's definitely a different scenario. And now you've got, a whole different feeling going into this final game. We'll see what happens. We'll have a better idea on Tuesday of what, needs to happen on Sunday for the Colts to make the playoffs. But right now they took care of their part, which they didn't do last week. So that's definitely a big step forward. And we'll see how things play out, over the next 6-7 days. But been a remarkable year, and it's going to come down to a season finale against the Texans. It feels just a tad different than last year's.
Well, I was going to say 2021, at least like going into that Raiders game, and then unfortunately going to that Jaguars game, there was something there in the final week of the year. Last year, that Texans game, boy, oh boy. I never forget sitting in my apartment this time last year, rooting for the Texans to win, to hopefully that would help get the Colts to get trade up to the number 1 overall pick. That obviously mean the Texans get off of it, which it happened. And Davis Mills was, for at least for a few hours in my mind, a hero in that game for what he did last year. Now, like I said, 1 year later, George, for both teams, obviously the Texans as well, this is a big-time playoff game for them this time next week. But for the Colts, essentially a win and you're in. Do need some help either way. But going to next week, at home, division rival coming to your building, George, like you said, going into this year, we've talked about it all year long. Never would have envisioned this sort of situation happening. And still, yet again, they continue to impress. And that's the best thing I think you could say out of this game, too, is it wasn't pretty, right? At times it was maddening, it was frustrating. At times it seemed like the Colts were going to revert back to 2022 and give the game away and not come through and close it out. And they find different ways each and every week, whether it's on the ground. This defensively we've seen in past weeks. This week was really on the ground, running the ball a ton to get a 2-possession lead, salt away the clock, and help you win the game. They found a new way to win, which is leaning on their rushing attack, grinding out yards, even when the Raiders knew that they were going to come at them with a run game, and find a way to get enough points on the board where even a last-second score there doesn't really impact or doesn't hurt you, I should say, like we've seen in past years. Another game, George, wasn't pretty, but found a way to win and now keep themselves very much alive right now in a wide-open AFC race.
Yeah, last 2 times that they've played on this field, they've run the ball really well. I think that's something that you can hang your hat on going into next week, because you would figure that's going to be another big key. If they're going to be able to beat the Texans, who I'm sure pretty happy with the way things turned out in the offseason with C.J. Stroud coming in here, they're going to need to run the ball, keep the ball out of his hands as much as possible, shorten the game. You figure that's the game plan. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. But you saw it in action here in the second half. They were able to run the ball, survive once again, as they have all year long, major adversity during the week. I mean, Kenny Moore gets the back injury on Friday. It's similar to what happened with Michael Pittman, but on the defensive side, where you go into the entire week thinking, okay, you've got this guy. And then all of a sudden on Friday, hey, there's a question. And then, this morning, nope, he's not going to play. You have maybe the youngest secondary in the league today back there. But, they look, it was a huge game for Davante Adams, but they didn't let him beat them. And I think there were 2 ways the Raiders were going to win this game. Either Davante Adams was going to beat them, and he did his part, but he wasn't able to get those big splash plays until right there at the end when he caught a touchdown pass that probably only he can catch. And then the other way was Max Crosby, who had 1 sack early, but after that, you didn't really hear much from him. One of those 2 guys were the best way for the Raiders to win this game. And the Colts didn't let either of them take it over to the point that they lost. But also, you're coming through a week where they lose tight end Drew Ogletree to an arrest, which obviously we haven't been on the air since this happened.
Right.
He's on the commissioner's exempt list. We'll see if he's ever going to suit up for the Colts again. That will play itself out through the courts and through, everything else that needs to happen in this situation. But that's another one of those things that you would think will rock a locker room. somebody that you're close to, somebody that has a role on this team and is accused of something horrific. We'll see. Not going to get into the details of that because right now we really don't know what happened. But certainly the accusations are something you never want to see happen. And that's the kind of thing that's going to normally affect the football team. And yet the Colts, again, rally around all of it, missing key people again, go out there. And yeah, it's ugly, but they win the game. And they put themselves in a situation now where they're at home on Sunday or Saturday. We'll see how things work out against the Houston Texans. And, they may not control their own fate. They may by the time that game rolls around. We'll see how all that plays out. But they're in a much better position than anyone could have imagined, back in August during training camp over in Westfield.
Bengals right now up 10-7. Obviously, if that would be big for the Colts if the Bengals lose, and all of a sudden, like you said, the Colts now can control their own destiny. Right now, first half, a lot of time, but right now beating the Chiefs as we speak here. But what you just highlighted, George, everything this week alone all goes back to and starts with one man, Shane Steichen. And again, that's a guy that, like you said, George, that he unfortunately, but now you look back at it, it has been a positive. Really, since day number one, this guy's had adversity thrown in his face. He's always used to dealing with some sort of extracurricular activity on the field, off the field, injury related, off the field related. He's gone through the ringer here in year number one, but it also has helped him prepare to where if bad things and uncontrollable things do happen, the team and himself still focus on the task. No one feels sorry for themselves. No one worries what we're going to do. No one's distracted. They come out and still play hard. And again, whether it's Drew Ogletree's legal situation, whether it's Kenny Moore's back injury, whether it's Julian Blackmon going on IR, like you said, we've seen countless situations. But this week alone, George, is just another week where I feel like we repeat ourselves a lot. But it's also, we do it for a reason because it's Shane Steichen continuing each and every week when hurdles are thrown his way to jump over them, not knock down the gate, not have to go back to the start or get DQ'd, and just continue to keep this team focused. And again, like you go back to 2021, that team ran out of gas. And we saw it right in this exact week on this field 2 years ago where they ran out of gas, and you could even argue maybe lost focus in part because there was a leadership vacuum that couldn't keep the engine going late in the year. And you're seeing now, I mean, the Colts have spent a lot of energy, right, digging out of a 3-5 hole where the AFC playoff race is so wide open, but also so competitive where you really have no breathing room, where we could see the Colts go 5-2 down the stretch and miss out on the playoffs potentially because of a loss in Cincinnati. And so it is very tight, and you don't have a lot of margin for error. But with that said, George, again, like you don't want to play the comparison game too much, I guess, because it is a totally different team between 2 years ago and now, obviously. But it's like you look at this team, how they played today. Again, there's no lack of energy. There's no lack of focus. And it's like anytime there's the game is in doubt, it's like, okay, like we've been here before. There's no panic, despite the fact, like you said, and this team is so young. And today, especially in the secondary, I mean, we got to go back and look, but I'm with you. Like historically, there can't be many secondaries younger than what the Colts trotted out here today. And even with the lack of experience, they still roll out there. No big deal. We'll get it done. And damn it, they got it done more times than not this year.
I think that's the standard that is probably the most important one that Shane Steichen has set here is it doesn't matter. There's no excuses. Find a way to win. I mean, that's sort of his philosophy. It's been what he's done from day one, like you said. And the team has really bought into that. And that's what you saw today. Okay, no Kenny Moore, no Julian Blackmon coming off a terrible performance in Atlanta, but you're getting Braden Smith back, you're getting Michael Pittman back, and you're going to find a way to win the game. Is it pretty? Absolutely not. But unfortunately, it's not college football. There's no style points. It doesn't matter here how much you win by or who you beat. You just take care of business and you move on to the next week. And I think that's been the approach from, the opening kick for this team. It's why you overcome losing your rookie quarterback really early in the season, playing so many games without your star running back, playing without your wide receiver, playing without both tackles at one point or another. The suspension of Grover Stewart. It goes on and on and on. All the things this team has been through, and how many times, on a Tuesday, you got some news that was just horrific for this team and thought that's going to be the last straw. That's going to break this team's back. And they just never allowed it to happen. So, whatever happens next week, I think you look back on this year as really a remarkable year. Now, it's going to be extraordinarily disappointing if they don't beat the Texans and they don't make the playoffs. I'm not saying that, by any stretch of imagination. But at 9 wins, they have exceeded all expectations. And you really have to tip your cap to Shane Steichen, who will now be the 5th consecutive full-time head coach in Indianapolis to have a winning season in his first season. And if he wins on Saturday or Sunday and they get some help that they need between this week or next, and they make the playoffs, he will be the 5th straight full-time head coach to lead the team to the postseason in his first season. That's remarkable. When you look at the other guys that did it, Tony Dungy had Peyton Manning.
Yep.
Jim Caldwell had Peyton Manning. Chep Pagano had a rookie Andrew Luck. Frank Reich had Andrew Luck coming back from the shoulder surgery. He had a rookie no one was quite certain what they were going to get. I mean, let's be honest. When you're going back into the summer, there was a lot of high hope for Anthony Richardson, but you didn't know what you were going to see. He got him for 4 games, playing with a backup the rest of the year. All the other things that have happened, I think by far in that group, he's had the highest degree of difficulty.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It would make it just so impressive of the 5. Like I said, just because of, we could argue, George, just the quarterback alone makes it the most impressive of the 5 coaches to previously do it for the Colts. But everything else we just talked about, overcoming adversity, the Jonathan Taylor drama going on in the offseason. Even George just taking over from where this team was in the offseason. Like when Tony Dungy took over the team, like Colts, I would argue were nowhere near as down and as dysfunctional as they were back then. And even coming off of, a 2-14 year in 2011, like that was a whole new team, a whole new rebuild in 2012. But again, there was a lot of optimism starting with Andrew Luck of this is a new era. Here we go. Coming off of last year, it was a total disaster. You kept saying, especially too, let's just get the circus out of town. Like that was the biggest thing this past offseason. Wasn't even wins, wasn't even the quarterback. It was just get the circus out of town. The bar was so low, and yet here we are talking about a guy that's going to have a above 500 record guaranteed and has a good chance at home next week to lead this team to the playoffs. It is, like you said, I am in total agreement. By far, easily, of the 5 coaches right now to at least have a winning record in their first year for the Colts, Steichen's is by far the most impressive. And then, George, I think that even speaks to in this game today. I was honestly getting ready at one point in this game to say, you know what? The Colts just beat themselves because they continue to just make some of these, not even stupid plays, but just plays that continue to shoot themselves in the foot offensively and defensively. You go back early in the game, you had Gardner Minshew just somehow ignoring Alec Pierce 40 yards down the field with no one in his zip code. I'll give you credit. You made the joke that maybe Gardner did not know the rules and did not realize that Alec was eligible, which is, maybe fair. Maybe he didn't realize 14, that wide receiver. Oh yeah, all the way down there. He's uncovered, not because the defense knows you can't throw it to him, just because they lost him. So you blow what is an equal, or I should say easy 7 points, and you could have gone up or could have put up 14 points in your first 2 drives. Don't do that. You have also later on in the game, you have a big 3rd down conversion that is negated by a holding call. Bernard Ryman would have been 1st and goal. Colts that drive instead settled for 3, could have been 7. And again, in a close game, that could have been the difference. You have in the first drive of the second half, EJ Speed running into the punter, allowing that drive to continue for the Raiders to end in a touchdown. Like, honestly, George, it got to the point where it was like, they're going to beat themselves. The Raiders are not going to win this game. The Colts are going to lose it. And it goes back to Shane Steichen again, not allowing this team to get down on themselves, feel bad for themselves. Like you said, it's no excuses, just win. Found a way to win.
Well, and the Raiders, paid back the favor. They had the jump off sides, and Gardner takes advantage of the free play, and they interfere with Michael Pittman, and all of a sudden you're in the field goal range. Then you miss the field goal, but they jumped off sides again. You get a second chance. It goes through. That's been, I feel like, the whole season. There's 5, 6, 7 plays that happen that you go back through, and you're, man, if that went the other way, this game's going to, the outcome's completely different. And I think all 16 games so far have been that way. Maybe not Jacksonville, the second time, certainly, maybe not the Atlanta and Cincinnati games because they got out of hand as well. But for the most part, probably the other 13, you're looking at a couple plays here and there, a couple decisions here and there I mean, look, if Gardner misses Pierce on that 3rd and 1 and it's not a touchdown and they don't somehow pick up the first down on 4th down, and everyone's, why are you throwing deep, in that situation? Little things like that change everything about the course of the game. But today they made the plays they had to make. And honestly, there's no reason to think next week won't come down to the same thing. There's going to be 5 or 6 plays that have to be made. One team will make them, and that team will win the game.
And it's also, I think, the mark of a good team. Like in this game alone, right? Like the Raiders are in a similar spot where they're fighting for their playoff lives. And they're in this. And like you said, the Raiders made their own problems. They had a false start on a 4th and 1 that they're going to go for it. All of a sudden they decide to punt. And they, like I said, they jumped offsides twice. That allowed the Colts to convert on a 3rd down. And then, like I said, get a re-kick after a Matt Gay field goal miss that, oh, by the way, game comes down to 3 points. Take those 3 points off the board. We're in overtime, and who knows how this game goes. It is a sign of a good team that you can get, you don't need every break to go your way. And again, the Colts gave the Raiders plenty of opportunities, but unlike Vegas, the Colts took advantage of the Raiders' mistakes and won the game on a few minute penalties and minute moments where Vegas had equal, if not more, opportunities and couldn't come through. It's a mark of a good team, George. It's frustrating, very frustrating, but it shows you that they can overcome their own mistakes, which is good. But also that when given breaks themselves, they could take advantage and win. And this year, especially with the margins in the NFL so thin, that's what separates good teams and playoff teams versus teams that will be home after next week.
This is what we've seen most of the season. I mean, so many teams playing with their backup quarterbacks, trying to change everything that they thought they'd be coming into the season and trying to find new ways to win. And the teams that have navigated that the best, Cleveland's probably the perfect example of that, just finding a way with 4 different quarterbacks to get into that 5 seed. And, they're locked in. They don't have to worry about anything next week. Those are the teams that have separated themselves. And so, however this ends for the Colts, I think that they showed that they're one of those teams that can overcome adversity, that can find ways to get things done. Now it's such a tight pack in the AFC this year that they may end up 10-7 and at home, or 9-8 and at home. Almost certainly will end up at home if they are 9-8 this year. I think we can say that without even anything else going on. It's going to take 10 wins to get into the playoffs. That's pretty well set. I know Buffalo's already won today. And the Houston win also pretty much guarantees you're going to need 10 wins to make the playoffs in the AFC this year, which is, that says something too about how many teams have found a way in the AFC this year to, it's not been pretty, but, get enough wins to keep yourself in contention. Cincinnati's doing it with a backup quarterback. Pittsburgh's doing it with a backup quarterback. Cleveland, like I said, with 4 different quarterbacks. I mean, it's just, that's been the tale of the NFL, especially the AFC this year, has just been, and the one team that hasn't had to deal with that is Baltimore, and they're sitting up at the top of the standings right now with a very impressive win today, and probably going to be the team that everybody has to beat, to get to the Super Bowl.
And with their win today, by the way, obviously they clinched the number 1 seed in the AFC, which means if the Colts make it, that they are guaranteed to not play the Ravens in Wild Card Weekend, which is probably a good thing. Probably a good thing to keep the season alive. One more week, I should say. That is for sure. One of the more impressive things too, George, is for the 3rd straight game at home, at least, when they needed to, whether it's Jonathan Taylor or not, the Colts are able to run the damn ball. And we were texting before that 4th quarter drive when the Raiders cut it down to a 7-point lead. 1 score here, whether it's a touchdown or a field goal, felt like the Colts were going to pull away and win the game. There's about, I think it was like 10 minutes roughly left in the game. I want to say maybe 11 minutes left in the game in the 4th quarter. Colts getting the ball back. And on that drive, 5 minutes, 40 seconds off the clock, 9 plays, 61 yards, all on the ground. Looked pretty reminiscent outside of who is carrying the ball, because obviously Jonathan Taylor wasn't doing that 2 weeks ago, but was doing it here on Sunday. They ran the ball at will, all 9 plays on the ground when they needed to score there to give themselves a 2-possession lead. Again, we are seeing, I don't know why, George, maybe this is a bigger conversation maybe for Tuesday's pod, why there has been a struggle recently running the ball on the road versus running the ball at home. But we've seen at least the last few games here at home when they've needed to run the ball and when the opponent knows they're going to run the ball. They've cleared lanes. They've, found holes, and that running game has taken off. And it, again, was the biggest difference, I would say, in this game here, especially in the second half, as to why they won the game.
No, there's no question about that. They found a way to close out the game again on the ground, and it ends up being extremely important. The Raiders go down and get in the end zone and score, and it comes down to that onside kick, which great recovery by Rodney Thomas on a kick that looked pretty scary for a minute, like maybe that could go either way, but he covered it up. He got the ball, and the Colts are able to take a knee and win this game, move to 9-7, and take their chances next week and see where it goes. But I think if you're Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter and Tony Sperano, you're probably asking yourself right now, what has been different at home? Is it the surface? Are the running backs just faster here? I don't know what is changed, but there's no doubt this team's ability to run the ball at home has been significantly better than its ability to run the ball away from home. And so that probably for next week, that's a good sign. If they win that game, it might not be such a good sign moving forward, but we'll see. The division title is still in play as well. I mean, it doesn't, after Tennessee's performance today, you're probably not filled with a great deal of confidence that they're going to be able to knock off the Jaguars, but who knows? I mean, this year's been insane. So, and we don't know what Trevor Lawrence's status will be next week. It's going to be, once again, a whole new season next week.
That would be classic NFL this year. Jaguars go to Tennessee next week, whether it's, I know Will Levis left the game today with an injury, whether it's Will Levis coming back, whether it's Ryan. It would be classic NFL. Ryan Tannehill and Mike Vrabel at home take down Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars on the road, or let's say Trevor Lawrence returns in that game next week and the Colts win the division. That would be classic 2023 NFL with the way this is going. And like I said, it shows you also too, it makes why this year is so impressive is because there's been a million landmines for every great team. 49ers have obviously dodged most of them. It seems that the Ravens are right now just in the left lane, hitting every green light possible. They are right now cruising at the right time. So maybe outside of the number one seeds in each conference, every other team is facing landmine after landmine. I mean, right now it's still 17-7 right now. Chiefs getting worked at home for the second game in a row over the Bengals. Another team that right now is heating up, but they found a landmine last week against the Steelers. So it's just like every team every week is just so far just finding ones in their, finding different landmines in their way. And the Colts have done a good job, consistency-wise at least, of avoiding a lot of those or being the landmine for the other team. And that just, it goes to show just, again, how impressive this season has been for the Colts, where we're still sitting here talking about almost essentially what could be a win and in at home next week against the Texans. It's really impressive. It's still mind blowing, George. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe how well they are playing. And also too, here's something I don't understand is we saw the deep shot to Alec Pierce on 3rd and 1 lead to a touchdown. We also saw Alec Pierce open earlier in the game, not throwing the ball to. I don't think it's a Shane Steichen thing, George. Tell me if I'm wrong in terms of just not calling deep shots. I think he is, and Gardner's not looking there. What I don't get in one frustration from this game is, especially early on, that was the second quarter, you throw the ball deep, it works, touchdown. I mean, again, correct if I'm wrong, unless the only other time I can remember Gardner throwing the ball 15, 20 yards down the field was the Michael Pittman Jr. pass interference on what was a free play on the offside late in the game. That he just, free play offsides, let me just chuck it deep. Other than that, George, is there a play that we saw, big explosive play down the field, that Gardner at least took a shot on? Like, I don't understand. We talk about it a lot. I get it. But early in the game, it works to Alec Pierce. Why not go back to something that has clearly worked?
That's been the question all year. There was one. He threw the ball to Josh Downs on that first drive and got the 50-yard gain. It wasn't quite as deep as the other two, but it was a deeper ball than most of the rest that he threw. Made a nice play there, got himself open, avoided the rush, big third down. It was a huge play in that drive, in that opening touchdown drive, which I think really set a tone here.
Good call.
I think the Raiders had come in being pretty hard to score on in the last few weeks. And not just that, their defense had been scoring itself so much, so many turnovers, so many takeaways from them that were resulting. I think they had 7 turnovers and 4 defensive touchdowns in the last 2 weeks coming into this. So, Colts going in there, getting that touchdown on the opening drive, I think was huge. But that's been one of the biggest questions all year long is why is Gardner sometimes a little bit more shy about, trying to get that deep ball to Alec Pierce. He did it, when he had to in the second quarter. Had done it as well in the first quarter. Maybe this game isn't as tight at the end. You never know. It would have changed everything about the game at that point. But the shots are called. They're there at times. I don't know because I'm sure a lot of it's the traffic in front of him. I don't know if he's more worried about the pass rush on that play or what's going on. It took a little bit of time for Pierce to get open on that deep ball because he had to kind of cross the field and get out into the open field there. Maybe Gardner just didn't have the faith at that point in the game that the pass rush was going to hold up, but I think the important thing there is they learned from it because I don't know if it was the same play that they scored on in the second quarter, but it was similar. It was a similar route. And I think it's one of those things that they saw on tape. Hey, look, it was there last time. Don't miss it again this time. And they were able to take advantage, when they had to. But that's, I think, honestly, one of the biggest things when you talk about the roller coaster the Colts have had when they're good and when they're bad. I mean, it's not a surprise. Their quarterback has a big impact on that. Gardner Minshew played really well today for the most part. He had that big chance that he didn't take there, but overall, he didn't turn the ball over, which was critical against this team. He didn't get sacked very much. I think just once early against Max Crosby, and he still was able to have a couple explosive plays. And I think that's, when he plays like that, the offense is obviously more dangerous. They're able to put more points up. And when he plays a little bit more timid and he's kind of holding on to the ball, you see things like you saw in Atlanta. So one of the biggest keys, and I don't know, does it go along with the running game? When they run the ball better, does Gardner play better? Is there a correlation there? It's been a season-long thing, but it's also part of the reason why he's not a full-time starter. I mean, you got to understand that too. The guy, I think, has done everything you could expect someone in his position to do. The plan was never for him to make 13 starts this year. That wasn't what they wanted to do coming in. And through 12 of those starts, he's got the team in position to make the playoffs. So I think you got to tip your cap to him, even though it hasn't been perfect. But I think that's what it comes down to. It does. I see a comment from Brody Cox over there that Alec's going to feast next year with AR's deep ball. I think that there's reason to be really excited about the possibilities if Richardson can stay healthy next year. The opportunities that you've seen out there for Alec Pierce, if you've got Richardson, dealing back there with him, Jonathan Taylor is going to be a different player next year. If Anthony Richardson can stay healthy, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. But for now, I think, good Gardner and bad Gardner, oftentimes it can be as simple as that. And next week, the Colts absolutely need good Gardner.
Oh, big time. Desperately need good Gardner back next week. That, without a doubt, you're 100% right about that. If you have a comment, by the way, drop it in the YouTube chat. Come on, let's hear it. What's your biggest takeaway right now? Big win today. Avoid the 2021 relapse. Guarantee an over 500 season this year, bare minimum. Give yourself an incredible opportunity to make the playoffs to the home game against the Texans next week. Let's hear it. Come on. Drop them in the chat. We'll read them here as we do go on the show. But to at least Brody's point, yes, next year is exciting. But also, George, this year, that's we can focus on this year first. And you see the limited, again, we talk about it feels like weekly. The limited opportunities Alec Pierce gets, he converts on them. And I just don't get why he doesn't get more opportunities. Again, I don't think it's Shane not dialing it up. I think he is. The broadcast said it. I think Andrew Catalan had the stat. I forget the exact number. I wish I wrote it down. I knew I should have written it down in the moment. And George, what happens? I'll remember it. Of course I don't. But it was Alec Pierce, I think, leads the NFL in go routes this year. And I want to say the number is 130. I could be off, but it's in that range. And they said going to today's game, he's run 130 go routes and has been targeted on 14. So it's that. I mean, that sounds right. You watch it sounds right. But it's
not surprising.
No. And it's frustrating because out of those 14 targets, they didn't give the stats in terms of, but I'm sure we could just go back and look at it ourselves. But it's out of those 14 targets, I would bet, George, he probably came down with at least 10. And of those 10, probably, I mean, how many, were explosive plays or near, touchdowns? Probably a good amount of them. So it's a high percentage play to go to Alec Pierce deep. When it happens, it works usually, and usually it's a big play. It just doesn't happen often enough. It leaves you scratching your head why. But it also is a good problem to talk about because, like you said, I mean, we were talking about Gardner, like the complaints about Gardner Minshew today are all in a positive, obviously coming after a win, but also it's, oh, I wish he threw the ball more. He threw the ball deep and he missed Alec Pierce for wide open touchdown earlier in the game. Like, this is a guy that, like you said, the first drive rolled out comfortable, nice look down the field to Josh Downs, get that first drive going and really get the game going off on the right foot, hit Alec Pierce late. Like you said, 0 turnovers, which was massive looking at how well that Raiders defense, I think it's 2 touchdowns defensively in each of their last 2 games. So that was a defense that was used to feasting. And they had a pick 6 and a fumble return for a touchdown just last week against Patrick Mahomes. For Minshew to not even put the ball in harm's way, George. Huge testament to him. This offense stayed on schedule. The only fumble, Michael Pittman Jr. right there, Johnny on the spot to pick it up. They did a tremendous job of not giving the Raiders opportunities to score here, and that's something they've been elite at, not just the last few weeks, but also really since Antonio Pierce took over as head coach. That defense has been one of the best in the league. And to not give them any opportunities or lose the game because of bad turnovers, like we've seen in other instances, I'll take it, George. I'll live with complaining about Minshew not throwing the ball deep if it means that's what we're complaining about, and not, oh, geez, those 2 interceptions. Can you believe it? Or his pocket presence. There's no happy feet this week like we saw last week in Atlanta. It was a very, like you said, a very clean game. Not his best game of the season, but a very clean, efficient game from Gardner Minshew, which is what we need.
In a hugely important spot. I mean, if he doesn't play clean today, we're probably talking about the Colts losing and needing, a mountain of help next week to get into the playoffs. And even if Cincinnati does beat Kansas City, I think there's like 5 things, and 4 if Pittsburgh doesn't beat Seattle, that can happen that can still get the Colts in. One of them is Cincinnati loses next week at Cleveland. Another one would be obviously Jacksonville losing, because then the Colts would get in as division champion. There's a bunch of different ways we can get into that more Tuesday when we know where they're at. But there wouldn't have been if they had lost today. There would have been basically one win and have like the rest of the conference lose, which is never what you want going into that last game of the season. So I think just the fact that they're here, I think that's the thing. I guess for me, maybe it's because it's New Year's Eve and you're just in that reflective mood, and you just kind of want to celebrate the good things that happen in the year. Just to see the position that they're in, I think you need to celebrate that. Gardner Minshew said, last week, they need to cherish this because it doesn't happen all the time. And I think that's true. You're not, it's just look at a year ago. We just talked about it, how different things were at the same time last year. And now, no matter what, you got, look, it's a playoff game on Saturday or Sunday next week, whatever it ends up being. It's a playoff game. It won't be officially titled as such, but it's going to be more important than the Pop-Tart Bowl. I can tell you that. In terms of
will Blue be edible next week?
That would be something, wouldn't it? I think every team in the NFL should grab an edible mascot now. But that's the thing. They're going to play a meaningful game in Week 18 for the first time since 2021, and really the 3rd time since 2018. That's nothing to sneeze at. I think that, look, yes, it's going to be highly disappointing if they don't close this out. I'm not trying to say that, but I think it's important to kind of understand, hey, you know what? There's been a lot of things this year that maybe you can pick apart. Some of Gardner's decisions, certainly some of Gus Bradley's decisions. There's a lot of things that you can sit here and they weren't perfect. But at the end of the day, you're sitting here in the waning hours of 2023, and the Colts are going to play a hugely important game at home next week. I think that needs to be celebrated.
Without a doubt. And you're 100% right about that. Toast to that tonight for sure as the ball is dropping. Toast to a chance for this time next week, that game being meaningful and a chance to get your heart ripped out possibly. Obviously a chance to get excited, but also a chance, like I said, for disappointment. But like the feeling, even if it is disappointment next week, it's going to be frustrating. It's not going to be one of those where it's, that's it all good. No, it's going to be disappointing if they lose. But that feeling of disappointment, looking after the game is over and you get a few weeks removed, is going to be much more. It's going to be a better feeling, if it makes sense, than just the disgust that we watched this time last year as you go into that Week 18 game when it felt like the Texans were just there to tank and lose, and the Colts just had no life whatsoever. And it's like the fact that you said the turnaround is you cannot take it for granted. Or like you said, just definitely take a moment to just be like, wow, like this is the year turnaround in 12 calendar months has just been nothing short of remarkable whatsoever. And part of the reason why that we're talking about next week being almost potentially a de facto playoff game is the fact that today, George, we were able to see this secondary that was decimated by injuries and needing guys at the last minute to come on in with not a lot of experience, step up. And for a Raiders team that, look, it's Aiden O'Connell, right? Is he Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow? Absolutely not. But still, you have Devontae Adams, one of the best receivers in the league. You had Aiden O'Connell attempt 47 passes on the day. And still, with that said, Devontae had his 13 catches for 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. You said before that second one in the corner was, I mean, that's a man catch. That is true. Like 3 guys are coming down with that. Devontae is one of the 3. That was literally nothing you could do defensively to prevent that from happening. But you had 2 rookies on the outside and Juju Brents and Jalen Jones starting. You had Nick Cross, who is super inexperienced now, stepping in for Julian Blackmon, who's been one of the rocks and heartbeats of this defense, now stepping in his shoes for the foreseeable future. And then you had, the most veteran and most consistent player in your secondary in Kenny Moore get ruled out late with a back injury. Now here's Chris Lamons coming on in. And again, that stat line is gaudy, right? It was 20 targets, 13 catches for 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. But like when you watch the game, George, this secondary, I thought, played honestly pretty well. And all things considered, did their job to keep the Colts in it, only allowed 20 points, and give them a chance to win the game. I was pretty impressed defensively, especially when that pass rush, which has been very good in the past, not do a very good job today at times in pressuring Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, well, it's tough again. I mean, we see that all the time with Gus's defense. If the front 4 gets home, then the defense works. If it doesn't, then there's trouble. And, the front 4 and the backs all work together. And so the younger backfield was going to make it tougher on the front 4 to begin with. But they're going to need the same thing next week. They're going to have to get after CJ Stroud. That's guaranteed. I mean, yes. I'm not spoiling anything about the Thursday preview pod to say they have got to put pressure on CJ Stroud next week. They did in week 2 and they won the game. We'll see if they're able to do it, here in week 18. That still to be determined. But they didn't do it today, not to the extent they did it at times, but they didn't do it to the extent that you'd really like to see them do. But they were able, look, the way things were set up, it easily could have been 8 for 150 and 4 touchdowns today for Devontae Adams. It wasn't. And I think that they made him work for what he got. Every one of those defensive backs at some point in the game made a big play. Whether it was, the pass breakup late there by Brents on the 3rd down when the Raiders had to settle for a field goal instead of a touchdown right before the Colts pushed it back out to 10 points. Whether even I thought Jones played a really good. He did everything he could possibly do on that last touchdown. I don't know what else he can do. His hands in there. He's right there with him. It's just Devontae Adams was, I don't know, ate too much of the Taco Bell in his house or something. I have no idea what
the nacho fries.
What the secret there is, but he just wasn't going to miss that ball. And that was one of those ones, I'll be quite honest. That was one of those ones where I saw it live and I thought, I got to see the replay. There's no way physically possible. He got 2 feet in and held on to that ball, but he did because he's not human. But
and Jones was raking the ball, like the ball is here and he's raking it out and it didn't move.
I don't know how. That's what I'm saying. I don't know how Jalen could play that any better. He literally did everything he could possibly do on that play, and it still was a touchdown. But that's how hard they made him. Well, that play to me is indicative of how hard the secondary made him work, and that counts because you end up winning the game. As a result of it. If he has 3 touchdowns instead of 2, the Raiders are walking out of here with a victory and still have a chance to win the AFC West. That's the other thing. You say what you want about the Raiders and their struggles over the year and everything. They've certainly been a better team under Antonio Pierce than they were under Josh McDaniels, which is a low bar, I know, but they still have been a better team with him than they were with Josh McDaniels. And they had everything to play for. They were coming off 2 huge wins that I don't think a lot of people expected them to get. Well, the Chargers win. They probably expect them to get, but not with 63 points.
No.
But how many people gave them a chance to beat the Chiefs on Christmas Day? That was not a large, Raiders fans. That was it. Right. Nobody else was going into that week thinking they're going to win. They still come in here with a chance to win the division. It was a desperate team. We talk about that all the time, but I think the Colts matched that desperation. They understood, sure, this is a playoff game for the Raiders. If they lose, they're eliminated. It was also a playoff game for the Colts, and they really got that. I'm not sure that happened all the time in Atlanta and Cincinnati. It did today, and that was critical for them. Now, if they have any trouble getting up for next week's game, check everybody's pulse.
You're right. And getting off to a fast start is huge because you get up 14-3, and like that Gus Bradley defense is built to play with a lead, right? The way they play, kind of backing off, not allowing any deep shots. If you're losing, and we've seen that, not ideal getting off the field. We saw it last week against the Falcons. What was it, 3 or 4 straight drives where the Falcons scored points? That defense is not built to come from behind. They are built to play with a lead, and getting out to a fast start, like I said, getting up 14-3 is huge because even like that's – look, it was frustrating at times because especially on that drive, kicked the field goal. It was a third down, like you said, Juju Brents knocked away from Devonta Adams near the red zone, ended up getting a field goal to make it a 20-10 game, a 20-13 game. I swear, George, all the offense coordinator for the Raiders did was you find one on Madden, and whether it's a square button and that's the play call, they hit the same play. It had to be 5 times in a row. It was, okay, we're going to run the Devontae deep out, this side, deep out, deep out, deep out, deep out. It took a while for the Colts to realize it. But like I said, but it goes back to when they needed to make a play, they made a play. This is not the best defense in the league. This is not the best offense in the league. They have drives where they absolutely can look like that. But consistently this season, George, and that's part of the reason why they are right now where we are at 9-7, when they need to make a play, offensively, defensively, doesn't matter what's happened on the drive or the game beforehand, they seem more times than not to make, like they make plays. They make plays. And that drive alone is just I think another highlight to show for it. Raiders march right down the field pretty easily. Gus Bradley, classic 4-man rush. That rush looked out of gas. That tank was empty for those 4 defensive linemen trying to get any sort of pressure on Aiden O'Connell. Those deep outs were killing the DBs. Third down, got to have it. Can't let a touchdown. Get the PBU. Kind of knew the play was coming, and you hold them to a field goal. They continue, George, especially defensively, which is more impressive today with the youth and inexperience playing back there, that they got to stop when they needed. And it's also interesting, too, Fernando Richards' comments, I don't know if I agree with this part. There was no coincidence that there wasn't any miscommunication issues with Moore out. Insinuating that Kenny Moore is a problem with communication, I would disagree with that. But I think the overall point he brings up a point. There was no miscommunication issues, George. There wasn't. Alec Pierce was left alone in his own zip code. Earlier in the game, Gardner missed him. There was no Devonta Adams and 50 yards of grass in front of him where the Colts just said, oh, you take him, you got him, and all of a sudden now he's alone. That the Colts deserve a lot of credit, and Gus Bradley deserves a lot of credit for getting this secondary communication-wise to a point where they didn't allow one communication bust to change the game.
That was one really huge thing coming in too, because all week long they were talking about Julian Blackmon as the communicator back there, and he's done a really good job of it throughout the year. He's a leader. He's got that natural leadership ability about him. And you're sitting there thinking, how are they going to respond? Because Nick Cross is an athletic freak. Everybody knows that. He's a really smart guy. He's showing, over the last part of the year, how much he can help this football team moving forward as well, but he's not a naturally vocal guy. It's just not part of his personality. And so there were a lot of questions, some of them directly to Nick Cross this week about, hey, that communication component, how is that going to work? And no one was quite certain how it was going to play out. He got better throughout the game against Atlanta at it, but you're saying going to go out there with Devontae Adams and, talk about being thrown into the fire. But he did handle it obviously well, because there weren't a bunch of miscommunications. There weren't problems out there, wide open guys, running free. A lot of the plays the Raiders make, you just give credit to the receivers. They made the plays, whether it was Adams or Jacoby Myers. It was receivers just making plays, going out there and getting the job done. And that's going to happen in this league. To Brody's point, do I think the Colts will look to move on from Gus after this year? Honestly, I think next week's going to have a lot to say with that. Next week's going to determine a lot of things. You win this game, you get to 10 wins, you go to the playoffs, you're probably not going to change a whole lot, because you're going to feel like, hey, that secondary is a year older. The group of defensive linemen that are together have a year together. They're going to be better with that experience. You're hopefully going to get your 4th overall pick back, and he can look the way he did in the brief amount of time that we were able to see him this year. I would think that if they win next week, the odds are better that they're going to keep the status quo. But if they lose, and if CJ Stroud goes off for a 500-yard game or something, you're probably gonna have different questions. And I think one of the big ones that everybody wonders, and the reason this keeps coming up, was obviously arranged marriage. Shane and Gus have a history together. They were together with the Chargers, but this wasn't a situation where Shane was able to go out and pick his own defense coordinator. It's the same thing as when Frank Reich came in and Matt Eberflus was already here. And there were a lot of questions that offseason. Is Frank going to keep that coordinator? We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think the fact that the Colts went 9-1 down the stretch that year and went to the playoffs, that didn't really become much of a decision. They kept Eberflus and they went forward with that group. I think it's going to be similar this time. It's just a guess on my part. I do think everybody kind of wonders the way Shane is, his aggressive nature. You saw it, when he was upset with the pass interference call and he was out there at the 20-yard line. Does he want a defensive coordinator who's more like that too, who's more of an aggressive play caller? I don't know. The question is, do they have the personnel to call a more aggressive game? I think one of the things I saw happen today, one of the things we all criticize, myself included, is they don't blitz enough. They're not trying to get, a couple of times they blitzed early and then a guy missed a tackle in the backfield and they give up, a big play. So you don't have, when Stephon Gilmore was here, it's a lot easier to blitz and leave those guys, leave him in single coverage. Now there's a lot of math in there that you got to do with these decisions. So I think everything's going to be evaluated. I know that. I can't imagine if we've learned anything about Shane in this year that we've been around him, it's that he's not going to leave any details unturned. I can't imagine he's not going to look through every single step of this process and what do they need to do. And if that leads him to the decision that he needs a more aggressive defensive play caller, then you're probably going to see an active offseason too, because if that's what happens, they're going to have to change the personnel over there. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think it's one of the bigger questions of the offseason once we get to that point.
And on that note too, if you're Chris Ballard, I would think you would almost in a way blindly listen to what Shane says, because you look at his offensive coordinator and offensive assistant coach hires, they've been all home runs. Again, starting with Tony Sperano Jr.
MVP.
Like, you're not kidding. He has single-handedly turned this offensive line around to another home game, especially where they run the ball down the Raiders' throat and lean on the run game in part to win this game. And so you got to feel confident if you are Ballard that if we got to find, or if Shane thinks he can do better at defensive coordinator, whether it's just a better overall mind or, like you said, a better scheme fit to get more aggressive on defense to match the offensive aggressiveness, you got to feel pretty good that Shane Steichen's short list of names there for guys he wants on his side, you got to feel pretty good that he's going to get a home run here like he has so far on the offensive coaching staff. One other point I want to make about the secondary, George, and like you said, partly today we kind of saw when Gus decided to blitz early, when missed tackle, all of a sudden you're trusting guys in the back on the back end to hold up their end. There's also one point in the first half too where Rodney Thomas is out of the game and Ronnie Harrison was in. And so now all of a sudden, in terms of this team and this system, the most experienced guy back there was Nick Cross. So it's still again, Devontae went off on paper, but it also never felt like, George, he actually took over the game. He had a lot of targets, but earlier in the season when they played the Titans at home and DeAndre Hopkins had a similar stat line, it was 8 for 140. He took over the game and felt like at times it's oh boy, this Colts, they can't stop him. We've seen receivers, Calvin Ridley in the first half of the first game took over that first half especially, and the Colts had no answer. Even though Devontae got a crap ton of catches and yards and 2 touchdowns is nothing to roll your eyes at. It never felt like at any point in this game, George, he took over the game, which I do think at the end is a credit to Gus Bradley and the secondary for, they got toasted, but they kept bouncing back, coming back, and didn't allow one big completion to lead to 2 or 3 in a row and just have the entire drive dominated by 17.
They made him earn it. It wasn't Rashid Shaheed all over again, with the Saints, where it was just a couple of really big plays that were uncompetitive. And you'd rather have a game like this. They were able to be competitive, to make Devontae earn it. And, ultimately, look, it's an ugly win, but you'd much rather have an ugly win today than an ugly loss. Guarantee you the Raiders are not flying home thinking, well, at least they beat us ugly. I guarantee you that's not a thought right now on that plane.
And that's why I'm glad we started this pod off to kind of bring a full circle back to Shane Steichen, highlighting him finishing this year above 500, being the 5th consecutive Colts head coach in their first year to finish year number 1 with a winning record, and potentially next week, depending on how things go, could also be the 5th consecutive Colts head coach to make the playoffs in his first year. I think that's where a lot of the attention belongs, because it was an ugly game. Like this year kind of was a good encapsulation, if you will, how the season has gone, where there's been trying times, there's been adversity, there's been times where you're excited. It's 14-3, just like early in the year. Anthony Richardson puts up 2 early touchdowns against the Texans. It's like, oh my God, here we go. This is going to be the year, and he's going to just break out, and gets concussed, and then obviously misses other games. And it's like you get out to an early start, you're brought back to reality. There's questions about the defense, there's questions about the offense. A few times where you stall and you're stagnant. And it's like each and every time, for the most part, this team has bounced back. And also, too, George, this team has consistently bounced back after bad performances. Last week, we talked about on Tuesday's pod. Last week, every single person outside of Michael Pittman Jr., whose stock only increased because of his absence, every single person, every single position group had a bad game in Atlanta. There's not really one bright spot you could highlight. And to, again, the team's credit, they bounce back like they have after really every time they've laid an egg. They have bounced back with a spirited and cleaner performance. Now, the Browns game right after that Jaguars blowout loss in Jacksonville, they didn't win that game, but it was a better performance than we saw the week before. They continued to answer the bell, George, after laying an egg. And now you just hope that another egg isn't laid next week against the Texans like it was last week, coming off a nice win against the Steelers.
If it is, it'll be the last one. I know that. There's no question about that. It'll be interesting. I think it's a big game. It's going to be interesting to see how CJ Stroud responds in this environment, coming in as a rookie, and we've seen what he's handled and the way DeMeco Ryans has handled everything over there. It'll be interesting to see how Gardner Minshew responds, because he's got to understand too, and he kind of alluded to this a little bit last week. The sense of urgency for him is greater than it is for even the rest of the team. A lot of these other guys are younger, or even like DeForest Buckner. He's going to be here for a little while. Everybody knows that he's an integral part of this team. Gardner Minshew has no idea after next week where his next step will be taken, and for whom and in what role. Will he be back here? Will he be backing up Anthony Richardson again? Will he be somewhere else as a starter? And so I think if you're him, you're coming out here and you're thinking this is the Super Bowl for him, right? You have a chance to go in there. And same as I was talking about with Gus Bradley, how what happens next week will color the way he's looked at in the offseason and probably color some of the decision-making involving him. If Gardner Minshew wants to start somewhere else next year, and I'm sure he does, why wouldn't he? If you're a player in this league and you don't want to start, something's really wrong with you. If Gardner Minshew wants to start somewhere else next year, that case is going to be exponentially stronger if he led a team to the playoffs. If he wins this game next week, and he's smart enough to understand that. He knows it's a huge game for him. It's a huge game for Michael Pittman, who's coming in a contract year. It's a huge game for Cards today, and I'm sure would like to end the season with at least one 100-yard game. There are a lot of things coming in that game that are going to be looked at completely differently with a win or a loss. And I think it's just knowing that coming into that, you're going to start 2024 with a game like that, with stakes like that, it's going to be a blast.
With that said, though, because we've seen this happen to young, inexperienced teams before in the NFL, that can also be used as a negative, and you have to harness that energy properly. Because like you said, it's not like Gardner Minshew is the only backup quarterback playing well and leading his team to the playoffs, or at least having the bare minimum in the playoff race. So Gardner's not like, so there's going to be a lot of competition for backup quarterbacks next year trying to get starting jobs. You don't want Gardner next week coming out saying, oh boy, this is my shot here. I got to, throw over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. I got to show him I'm better than Jake Browning, or I'm a better option than Joe Flacco, or you name it, like any of these other backup quarterbacks that are playing well, leading their team to a playoff spot. Play within the offense. Let it come to you. And again, not try to be the hero here. Not that he's done that so far this season. Not that Michael Pittman Jr. has done that. Not that Jonathan Taylor has done that. No one's really done that. And honestly, George, that's a big reason why this team is where they are. No one's been selfish. It's truly been about the team. And even in frustrations like we've seen with Michael Pittman Jr. before, kind of having comments that he said maybe not get taken the way he wanted them to, the way he at least verbalized it did not come out as he wanted. But everything goes back to wanting to help this team win. That's a huge reason why, again, the lack of selfishness is massive. And this team could have splintered, maybe should have splintered at different points in this year, George, and they haven't. And that's a credit to the culture that Shane's built, but also a credit to the players for buying in and just truly taking it one game at a time and doing whatever it takes, whether it's passing the ball one game, running the ball another game, needing your defense to just to be complete, stalwarts, and another game needing Kenny Moore to have 2 pick sixes to win it. Like, whatever it takes, they have been on board for it. And truly, at least to me on the outside, seems like they enjoy, like, they celebrate each other's success. It's not like, oh, we won, but I had 1 catch, so I'm pissed off. It's, oh, we won. I had 1 catch, but Kenny had 2 interceptions. He's the man. Let's go celebrate him today. Like that, it sounds corny, and maybe it sounds even like college-like or high school-like, but like that's how, at least the vibe I get from this team, George. I think that's a big reason why we're sitting here talking about a 9-7 football team.
It's closer to a college age team, so it makes sense that they have some college traits. But I think that's been the biggest. If you wanted to look at one accomplishment for Shane, you want to point to that's been the biggest reason for his success this year, because it's been a true team. This team was splintered at the end of the year last year. There's no question about it. There were people wondering what comes next. I mean, there's so much insanity went on during that circus atmosphere that there was a lot of question when he walked in here of what's going to happen. And I know there were people around the league watching this situation and thinking, that's tough to walk into. I don't know how this is going to go. And he has from day one gelled everybody together, put them all on the same page. And we've talked about it, again and again and again on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. You can go back through wherever you get your podcasts all the way back to training camp, where we've talked about everything he's dealt with, from the Jonathan Taylor holdout to the most recent Drew Ogletree arrest. None of it has shaken the belief this team has in him and in one another. And I think that's been its biggest year. I got asked, throughout the year when I would go on radio, for the opponent, whichever week it was, why is this team winning? And again, I said, it's that effort that they have given. They will fight you until the final buzzer every week. And that's because they are 53 guys altogether, 69 with the practice squad, all playing as one. And you're right, not a guy in there cares. You don't hear Gardner patting himself on the back, look how great I was today, or Alec Pierce. It doesn't matter. They're all just trying to win games. And I think after you went through what you went through last year, it's a lot easier to the only stat you care about is wins.
That's true. Wins, because you are much more appreciative of winning. You're right. Maybe that's where last year was a I guess a positive, if you will, and made it a little easier for Shane Steichen to come in. The bar was so low that, hey, just winning games, we're happy with that. We don't need to also have, good individual performances. It's just getting a win is huge. Last thing here, George, hate to end on a sour note, but it's one we have not yet addressed, and it's starting to get a little bit concerning. We talked about it a few weeks ago with the concern level about Matt Gay. Now, technically today, he went 3 for 3, did not miss a kick. But again, that was bailed out by an offsides call, missed a 50-yarder that would have given the Colts a 2-score lead. Instead, I mean, with that miss, would have opened the door for the Raiders to tie the game earlier. I asked you a few weeks ago your concern level. It was a little bit moderate, but nowhere near alarming. As you go into Week 18, where's your concern level now, George?
It doesn't matter. They have no choice. I mean, I got to go back to the Chuck Pagano-ism now. They paid him too much money, and unless he's injured and you're going to put him on IR and you're going to bring somebody else in here, he's the guy, and he's going to be the guy next year too. So they've got to hope that they get back to that early season version of him. I don't know if the right hip is a problem. He was on the injury report a couple weeks ago with that. I don't know if that's been the issue. The weird thing is he keeps hitting the upright. That's hard to do.
You're right.
It's not an easy accomplishment. But yeah, that's one of the many things. If I had to list my chief concerns right now going into next week, tackling has got to get better. There's just the last 2, even today, there were too many missed tackles.
Yes.
Got away with it more today, but they can't continue that and make any kind of dent, the rest of this year. And then probably Matt Gay would be number 2. I mean, you just, because if it's a close game again, if he misses an extra point or he misses a field goal, we've been down that road before here. How that turns out. They've been down that road against this opponent recently. So I think I'd probably make it the number 2 concern. I mean, it's right there. Probably the other one would be, Minshew. Are you going to get good Minshew or bad Minshew? Is he going to hold the ball in the pocket and get sacked and turn the ball over, or is he going to play like he did today and make big plays and help this team win games? Those 3 things, I think, tackling, Matt Gay, Gardner Minshew, to me, those are the 3 biggest concerns going into Week 18.
You're right. Like, they're not moving off of him. So maybe concern level is not the best way for me to phrase it. Here's, I guess, how I'll approach it. I would love your thoughts on this going to Week 18. I think if you're Shane Steichen, it's time for you for the first time to think, if it's a 4th down and 5 at the 35-yard line, can I count on a 50-yard field goal? Like, that's, I guess, more the concern. Like, next week, I think for the first time this season, you have real second thoughts. Because even like when he's missing a few kicks, I think, to your point, he's veteran enough to where you don't have to worry too much about his mental state spiraling, where now the confidence is lost and he has bounced back again. Technically, today went 3 for 3. So it's not like he's missing field goals left and right. It's like, holy cow, we can't use them. I think, though, next week it's at a point where if you're 45 yards and past field goal wise attempt, I think, and if it's 4th and manageable, I think if you're Shane, you should go for it. At this point, being more aggressive, and once you cross midfield, maybe until you get to the opponent's 30-yard line, so that 20-yard buffer, let's call it. If I'm Shane, I think, you know what, this is 4-down territory. 4th and 6 and in, let's say, like manageable. I think that's when you really see the difference of let's just go for it more often versus let's settle for the field goal. I mean, Shane's been an aggressive guy anyway, so it's not like it's new, and it's not like he's more, again, he kind of kicks the field goal, I feel like, when he needs to, or when mathematically you kind of have to. But I think from an aggressive coaching perspective, I think now is the first time you say, you know what, 4th and 6 at the 35-yard line, I feel better about going for it. I don't really trust the 51-yard field goal here. Maybe, what are your thoughts on that perspective in terms of aggressiveness of going forward in that?
I don't think it takes much to push Shane in that direction anyway. So I think that probably is going to be the case. But he's been pretty steadfast, and I still believe in him. And he made the decision today, to go ahead and kick it again right after the miss. I think that tells you a lot. It was 4th and inches, and they could easily have sent out the offense and, I don't know, put Zaire Franklin out there throwing the ball to Mo Alley Cox, some of the crazy things that they've done. But the fact that he went back out there for the 45-yarder, I think, shows that Shane still has the confidence in him. Now, will that backfire on him? I don't know. And will he be even more aggressive? I think that's one of the things to watch next week. Will he be even more aggressive, period? Because so much is on the line. He was it's interesting because a lot of these bigger wins that they've had this year, especially Pittsburgh the last time, he came into the post-game press conference and he was pretty happy. You could tell that he was relieved, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. And today he was very focused still. He was very much like, and somebody asked him, I think it might have been Bob Kravitz, are you going to I think actually it was Greg Doyle. Are you going to celebrate this at all? Because it doesn't seem like you will. And he said, no, he's not going to give himself any time. He said, he usually gives himself about an hour to be happy about a win, but now he's right on to Houston. So I think it'll be interesting to see, is he going to be more aggressive in general? You got to put some points up next week against that quarterback that you're playing against. That's just to be expected. And when your kicker is, had some shanks, it'll be really interesting how that plays out.
The Colts have been a very good 4th down team this year as well, so they've had a lot of success in that area. One thing here, actually, that you sparked a thought. Did you have any problem? I didn't. I thought going for the field goal, it was 4th and 1. I thought kicking the 45-yard field goal was still the right move. Did you have any problem with Shane still sticking with Gay and not going for it on 4th and 1?
No, I thought it was still the right move. And he obviously put it right down the middle on that one. And you needed the 2-score lead there. And if you fail to get the 4th down, they're in really good position to go down and, tie the game. So I didn't have any issue with it. But I think there was, if you had question about your kicker, if you had serious concerns, you would have gone for it there.
If he was younger, I would agree. Like, you know what? Let's just, get the offense back out there. You're worried about the confidence being shaken. Veteran kicker, like I said, obviously it worked out, but in the moment, I was sitting there saying, yeah, that's the right. I was more sitting there saying the Colts got lucky that they're going to get a re-kick versus, they should go for it here on 4th and 1. And so I'm with you. No problem with the re-kick. And again, Matt Gay, to his credit, bounced back. Tough spot to do it. Bounce back, kick the 45-yarder, no problem right down the middle. But I think next week, that's definitely something to watch. Once you get to that 45-yard field goal range, what does Shane start doing there? Does he start saying, you know what, we're going forward here more than let's kick the field goal, whether, obviously time and score obviously also play a role in that, but we'll see how that game does break down. That's definitely something to watch for, without a doubt. All right, George, I think that should do it here. We survived. Well, I survived. The flu kicked my ass all week, and I was worried about my stamina here. I've been out of the podcast game since Tuesday. I'm glad I got my legs back.
It was a rough week, but like the Colts, you overcame adversity. You're able to be here for this huge post game, and now we just got to make sure we keep you healthy all week this week because biggest. I'll just say it right now, biggest week in the history of the Blue Horseshoe Pod.
That's right. That is right. You heard it there first, folks. Biggest week in Blue Horseshoe podcast history, which is why if you're watching, especially for the first time, thank you. Appreciate you. Welcome. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts because we are back Tuesday. We are back Thursday. And we are going to be back Sunday, hopefully.
Or Saturday.
Or Saturday. You're right. Or Saturday. We'll get the schedule, I guess, either later tonight, early tomorrow, at some point. So Saturday or Sunday, keep an eye out for that. But we will be back with hopefully what is a joyful pod. Really fast here, George, because you sparked one thing with the injuries. Jonathan Taylor, post-game. Is there any discussion, mention of a potential injury, any status update with him?
Nothing yet. Shane said, no injuries to report from the game, but last time with the thumb, we didn't know anything about it till Monday. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on over the next 24, 48 hours as well.
Definitely telling, down the stretch, it was Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson taking a good amount of carries instead of Jonathan Taylor. Definitely said they're going to need him. There's a hot take for you. I'll leave you with this, a hot take. Colts are going to need Jonathan Taylor on Sunday. That is for sure, especially if Zach Moss is a no can go next Sunday as well. So happy New Year, or I guess happy early New Year. Happy early New Year. That's what we'll say. Enjoy.
The Colts said a happy 2024 at halftime, so you're not the first to tell me that today. So
that's an interesting little early. Oh, okay, is that the ball behind you dropping? Lit up, ready to go? That is bright over your shoulder. That's what it looks like.
It does, doesn't it?
I was thinking you were in Times Square. You teleported.
Hey, well, you know me, quick. I got that short area quickness.
So a happy early New Year. Celebrate responsibly, but also, hey, send a toast to the 9-7 Colts. Let's go. Keep the playoff hopes alive. Give yourself a massive opportunity next week at home against the Texans to cash in on the playoffs for the first time since 2020 and continue what has been a really fun and magical season. Hopefully that continues, George. But like I said, before we get to next Sunday, biggest week in Blue Horseshoe Pod history. Subscribe, like, download. Tell your friends about us because we got a lot coming your way between now and next Sunday or Saturday. Happy New Year. Enjoy the win. And we'll talk to you on Tuesday on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.